Well, good morning, Paradox. We could just leave Craig up there in that frozen pose the whole time if we want to. It was kind of nice. I'm super grateful to be here with you this morning, and grateful to Pastor Craig for the invitation, grateful to Jasmine for your leadership. I have worshiped with you only a couple times, but I do consider myself part of the Paradox community, and I'm thankful for everything that this church stands for. So thank you for who you are. Just a little bit about me. So I've been a youth pastor ever since I graduated from college. I come from the Seventh-day Adventist faith tradition, and I've worked within that denomination for coming up on 11 years now, but always in youth ministry. And I love working with young people, and I especially love working with young people who are excited to see Christianity change and grow and move and shift and follow the Spirit of God. And the opportunity to just spend this morning with the Paradox community is just something I'm really grateful for. 2 years ago, my father-in-law shared some good news with us. He had bought tickets for the whole family to go see Hamilton. How many of you have gotten to go see Hamilton? Okay, wonderful. So we were obviously excited. It was going to be at the beautiful Pantages Theater in Los Angeles. The date for the show was March 18 of 2020. And so obviously that show got canceled, but the good news was it then got rescheduled and then canceled and then rescheduled and then canceled and then rescheduled to this past Christmas Eve. And we were so excited to go. I mean, Christmas Eve, Pantages, Hollywood, Hamilton. And so we piled in the car, we drove out there, matinee show, had these really nice seats. You've seen that gorgeous theater. We could see the stage and the setup, and we're just so excited. And then they announced over the intercom that the show was canceled. And so we got in our car and drove home. And as we went home, I thought to myself, like, what are the odds of this? You know, we get these really, really hard to get tickets for the very week that the world would shut down. And then we get rescheduled to the show date of when that show would once again get shut down. And I'm thinking, like, how could this happen? But then, if I'm honest, the thought in my head was like, actually, the odds of this are pretty good, because life does this all the time. We think something awesome is about to happen, or just everything is good, everything is just chill, like it's all moving along pretty good, and then it isn't. Something just goes wrong, and we're met with disappointment, or we're met with frustration, or we're met with reasons to express our lamentations. Now, obviously, not getting to see Hamilton is the smallest of issues. We actually weren't that upset. We just drove home. We watched it on Disney+. We put our masks on to make it feel like the show, you know. But obviously, while that is not a true, you know, that's like a first world problem, as we call it, there are real issues in our world and in our lives that we face. I'm sure that we've all been following what's been happening in Ukraine. It's been a month now. And all you can say is that it is devastating. I saw that we are approaching now 1 million deaths in the United States from the coronavirus. 1 million. I mean, what do you even do with a number like that? That is heartbreaking. And I'm sure that some of us here have carried in here some things with us to worship this morning that we would have loved to have just left at home and just have an hour or two without it, but you know it's very present still with you right now, and I'm so sorry for that. Sometimes it feels that the reminders of the incessant sadness we experience in this world come all too often. So I'm the youngest of 4 kids, raised by a single mom. Anybody else here the baby of the family? Anybody the baby? We have a few of you. Anybody here the oldest? Who's the oldest? We applaud you, eldest siblings, okay? All right, we can't forget about you. Who's the middle child? Hey, a lot of middle children. Anybody here an only child? We love you as well. We do. I'm the youngest. I'm the baby. And my family's not a church-going family. But one of the earliest memories I have was when I was 5 years old. And my sister, this is what I remember, my sister hurriedly rushing us into the bathroom of our house and locking the door. Because at that same time, my mom and her best friend were trying to keep our front door closed as my father was trying to break into the house and take us kids with him. And I can still see in my head my 5-year-old face looking back at me through the bathroom mirror with bloodshot eyes, wondering what is happening right now. And after that moment, I didn't see my dad much anymore, but I did learn what the word alcoholic meant. And you can never fully replace the void of not having a dad in a little boy's life, but my mom did the very best she could. And from a young age, I loved sports. It was just my world was I just wanted to play sports constantly. And of course, didn't have my dad, but my mom was ready to step in. And so I would create these games that I could play with my mom. And I loved football. And so this game I created was called the quarterback sack game. And if you know anything about football, you know that when the quarterback has the ball, when the defender tackles the quarterback, they call that a sack. And so as a little boy, if I saw my mom down the hallway, I would shout out, "Quarterback sack," and I'd run after her, and she'd pretend to run away from me, and I'd jump around her leg, and I'd tackle her, and she'd fall, and we'd laugh together, and, it was a happy childhood. One day, my mom, she sat me down, and she said, "Aaron, I need to tell you something." I was like, "Yes, Mommy, what is it?" She said, "We can't play the quarterback sack game anymore." And I just remember being devastated by this. I said, "Why?" And she said, "It's not that I don't love you, because I do, and it's not that I don't enjoy these moments with you, because I do. It's just, well, you're 32 years old now, and I'm worried that you're gonna hurt me." "Why, Mommy?" One day when I was 12 years old, she sat me down for a different conversation, and she told me that I was gonna be going to a new school for 7th grade. And she called it a 7-day Adventist school. And I had no idea what that meant. I was like, 7-day? It's like no more weekends? Like, what does this mean? I don't understand. I'd never gone to a Christian school before. And so I went. And if you've ever been the new kid in school, you know it can be very difficult, especially 7th grade. I mean, 7th grade is kind of a challenging year no matter what, let alone being the new kid at a private Christian school who doesn't know, the language and the culture or anything about the Bible. And it was an adjustment. And 3 weeks into my time at this new school, 9/11 happened. And, I mentioned that I work with a lot of young people, and so usually if I mention 9/11 to young people, most of them were not born yet in 2001. And so I just asked if they've seen videos of it. And some of you here are young, and so I could ask you that if you've ever seen videos or know about September 11. But to the rest of you, I bet that it takes you 1 second to remember exactly where you were the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001. So if I can just share my experience with it, I was getting ready for school, of course. And I remember seeing on the television, a burning building. I'd never heard of the World Trade Center. I grew up in Northern California. New York City was off the radar. But I saw my mom watching with just a look of horror. And then I remember watching live as one of the buildings collapsed. I had never seen anything like that before. And realizing in that moment, I just watched hundreds, thousands of people die in that moment. And then I remember going to school, and it was a very overcast day, even though it was September, and there was such a spirit of sadness on the campus. I had a classmate whose older brother was enlisted, and so now they assumed their brother was going to be going overseas, and of course our teachers were mortified, and I distinctly remember going from one class to another and looking up into the sky and wondering when the next plane would come for us. There was just so much sadness. And it was strange because it was in that moment where I was confronting an event filled with more grief than I'd ever experienced, this was also the time when I was first introduced to Jesus. And this idea that God was not this big, domineering king in the sky, but that God was a person like you and like me. God was like a guy who walked and talked and smiled and ate and slept and said cool things like what Jesus said. Jesus made God so relatable to me. And as a kid who had been going through the terror of 9/11, I really liked that idea. And before long, because of how my Christian school welcomed me in as an anxious 12-year-old, their community became my community. And their religion became my religion. And their Jesus became my Jesus. And it became such a happy time of my life. But of course, before long, those two simultaneous realizations had to converge, and the inevitable question came to my mind, which was, where is a God like Jesus in a tragedy like 9/11? I knew what Jesus said to a vulnerable kid like me in that moment. But what does Jesus say to a mourning mother, to a grieving father, to a lonely senior citizen, or to a broken country? Where is Jesus in the midst of the pain? Where is Jesus when it hurts? I understand that you all are in, let me make sure I get this right, you are in part 63 of a 66-part, 9-year sermon series. Did I get that right? Is that right? Okay, good. Love it, love it. That is very Craig. And currently you're going through the book of Luke, and I love the book of Luke, and so I'm happy to continue in this series. If Craig had given me like Obadiah, I'm not sure if I'd be here, but in the book of Luke, I want us to focus on one word in particular, and that is the word gospel. And mainly this question that I just want you to chew on. What is the gospel? Is it an old story? Is it a set of beliefs? Is it an exclusive club? Is it an agreement that you sign? What is the gospel? And of course, we get the word gospel from Scripture. We translate it as good news. And when Jesus arrived in ancient Palestine, it was known where to find this good news. It was the same place to find God, and that was high atop a mountain in this luxurious, opulent, holy temple. That was where you'd go to experience the presence of God. And then Jesus comes, this lowly, itinerant rabbi, and he tells them that the building can stay up or be torn down because the true temple does not sit still atop a mountain. No, the true temple is not made of cold marble and hard brick. The true temple is living and moving and breathing, and it doesn't wait for people to come to it. It goes to the people. And then Jesus went to be with the people. And on one particular Sabbath early in his ministry, he's at his home church in Nazareth in what could be considered one of Jesus's big debut moments. I mean, imagine he's this 30-year-old man who spent his entire life growing up in this neighborhood, but now he's going to start his ministry. And you can think of it like a new campaign where this is his, inaugural speech, if you will. And so what does he do? I mean, he could say or highlight anything in this moment. And what he does is, as it tells us in Luke chapter 4, he stands up and he unrolls the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And so if you have, your phones, you can look at Luke chapter 4. It starts in verse 18, but here is what he reads. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. He then rolls the scroll back up, hands it off, and sits down. And with everybody's eyes fastened upon this guy, says one more thing. He says, oh, by the way, today, this scripture is fulfilled. Boom. Is that the gospel? Good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoners, sight for the blind, and liberation for the oppressed. Let me ask you, can you relate with any of those groups in your life right now? Later that night, Jesus practices what he preached. It says, beginning in verse 40 of that same chapter, at sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands upon each one, he healed them. At daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. Stay here, Jesus. But Jesus was always on the move. And he says to them, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent. Paradox Church, what is the gospel? Jesus continues from town to town, going from place to place, and he's often going to the places where people were experiencing the most suffering. And following another important moment, he gives this Sermon on the Mount. You can read it in Matthew chapter 5. It's kind of like another, debut message that he gives. And after that, he comes down from the mountain, and most of these people who are on the mount with him, they follow him. There's something different about this rabbi. And it's amazing because as soon as he's down from the mountain where he's speaking about the gospel, he encounters a man afflicted with leprosy. And you can imagine that all these people who just heard him deliver this sermon followed him down the mountain, they're backing away. Because this man is untouchable. This man is not only defiled himself, he can defile you if he gets too close. And so they back away. And Jesus, of course, doesn't. Jesus doesn't back away. No, Jesus goes to that person. And he doesn't just heal him. He holds him. Jesus could have healed him in any way, with a word, with a snap, with a clap. But he heals him with a touch. Another day, we read about Jesus being invited to bring a dead girl back to life. And now the crowds are really excited. They're like, man, you think the other show was good. This is going to be the best performance yet. And they follow him, and there's a big crowd, and they're pushing against him. And in that moment, we read that there was a woman who had been afflicted with her own debilitating condition. And she's on her hands and knees, and she can't even speak up. And even if she tried, she'd be drowned out by the voice of the excited crowd. And all she can muster to do is reach out and just barely brush the hem of Jesus' garment. Mind you, Jesus is being boxed in by dozens of people in this moment, but he stops. And he waits. And he kneels down. And he cares for this woman. And they're thinking, come on, we don't have time for her. Let's get on with the show. And the dad of the young girl named Jairus, he really wants Jesus to be in a hurry. And we understand why. But Jesus stops and cares for that woman. But maybe the saddest scene of all that Jesus goes to is this pool in Jerusalem called Bethesda. And it's at this pool where different people with their own conditions would gather around because they believed that once the water moved, it was an angel stirring it, and the first person to enter into the water after it moved would receive healing. And so you can picture in your head that just a gentle gust goes by and the water ripples a little bit, and suddenly a bunch of people who were not very mobile try to somehow get into the water. It's a heartbreaking scene to think about, and it's certainly not a place anybody would just leisurely want to go to spend a weekend. But we read that rabbi, the one who claimed to be the living, moving temple, on one Sabbath goes to that pool. And there he sees a man laying by that pool who's been there for 38 years. And Jesus heals that man. He gets up, picks up his mat, and he goes home. And so as a young boy, was reading these stories of Jesus, and now as a man I read these stories of Jesus, it reminds me that when Jesus said that he's not a God who sits high up on a temple that we have to climb a steep hill to get to, but he goes to where we're suffering, he backed it up. And as word continued to spread, even from prison, John the Baptist sends his disciples to ask about what's really going on, what's with this guy. And Jesus tells them, he says, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. So let me ask you, what is the gospel? And something that I appreciate that Craig says is that the sermon is not the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning of the conversation. And so with that in mind, I'll just share what I think I'm coming to discover what the gospel is, but that's for you to decide on your own. But I believe, based upon what I've read and what I've experienced, that the gospel is the good news that while pain and suffering do exist, they're not the whole story. Because there is a light in the midst of the darkness. There is a healing in the midst of the hurt. There is a restoration in the midst of the brokenness. I believe the gospel is the good news of a God who does not sit atop a mountain and wait for us, but a God who straps on sandals and goes to us in our moment of greatest need. I believe that the gospel is the good news of the coming of the kingdom of God, both now and forevermore. 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to serve as a hospital chaplain at Loma Linda University Medical Center. And I love being a pastor, and I believe strongly in pastoral ministry, but I will say those 4 months as a hospital chaplain is probably when I experienced the gospel the most strongly. And to those of you who work in healthcare, I genuinely want to say thank you. And the job description was simple as a hospital chaplain. Walk the floors of the hospital, knock on doors, respond to pages, visit bedsides, go be with people who are in the midst of possibly the hardest moment of their lives. And what was neat was we didn't even have an office, at least not the student chaplains, to go to. You couldn't just sit and wait for them to come to you if you wanted to. The only thing you could do is get out of the seat and go walk the floors of that hospital to go be with people where they were at. And I had some unexpected experiences. The first time I ever got a page, it was to go to visit a man who had requested a chaplain because he was very angry with the nurses. In fact, he was so belligerent, they had to put him in the straps at the bed. And so I walked into the room, and he strapped down, and he says, Chaplain, thank you for coming. And I said, mind you, this is the first page I've ever gotten. I said, yes, sure. What is it? What's going on? How can I help you? And he looked at me, and he said, Chaplain. Oh, he couldn't wave. And he said, Chaplain, I think these people are trying to kill me. And I said, tell me, why do you think that? What's going on? And he began to share not only what had happened that day, but what led him to the hospital and what led to that and what led to that. He shared his whole life story. And after about an hour of listening to him, I decided that maybe I could, say something. And I said, thank you for sharing that with me. And I really hope you get well. But I want to let you know that these people here, they're trying to help you. He said, oh, well, now I think you're trying to kill me too. And I thought, I blew it. I failed. This is hard work. But as it went on, I began to get more comfortable in the role and how do you respond to people in these moments? And I began to have what I could only describe as sacred moments in that hospital. There was the time I sat in the middle of the night with a mom who had just lost her young daughter in a car accident. We were praying together as she held on to me with one hand and onto her daughter's teddy bear with the other. There was the moment where the young girl with cystic fibrosis would get really excited when I'd come in because she loved to draw pictures and show them to me and play guessing games together. And maybe it's because that was fun, or maybe it's because that was the moment she could forget about her pain for a little bit. And there was the time I met the family in the ER who had just lost a son in his 30s due to a tragic accident. And I stayed with that family for hours, having no clue what to say. I felt totally helpless to help them, but I just decided I'm going to stay and just be here with them. And we stayed through the night. The son passed away, and then I left, thinking, I don't think I did anything for those people. And then 3 days later, I get a phone call from one of the chaplains in the hospital saying, Aren, there's a family that has been trying to track you down. They said you were with them when their son passed away recently. Can I give them your number? I said, of course. And we got on the phone together, and they said, Chaplain, without you that night, we could not have made it through. And I'm thinking, I didn't do anything. They said, your presence there meant so much to us. We're wondering if you would be willing to officiate our son's memorial service. And that was such a humble honor for me. And one more, there was the moment when I was paged to visit a room where Grandpa had just passed away. And I walked in, and he's on the bed, and the family is surrounding, and what I thought would be a very somber moment turned into a walk down memory lane. And they were excited to begin sharing with me every story. They pulled out their phones to show me pictures. Look, Grandpa loved to dance. Look at that, Chaplain. Look at that. And do you remember the time? And oh yeah, he loved to do this. And there was laughter, and there was joy. And then they said, Chaplain, would you say something? And once again, I'm thinking, what can I say? I don't know what to say. And so all I said was, is it okay if I read a piece of scripture? They said, go ahead, Chaplain. And where else? I opened up to Psalm 23. And as I read it, they began to say it out loud with me. And if you're familiar with the passage, I invite you to do the same. It said, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me down paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. For me, following Jesus has shown me that sadness and pain is very real, but it's not the whole story. Because as much pain as there is in this world, there is also so much love. There is so much beauty. There is so much goodness. And that doesn't mean we ignore the sadness. In fact, just the opposite. We use that goodness. We use that joy. We use that love, that hope, and we take it to our neighbor. We give them the opportunity to experience the gospel as well. And sometimes we're the ones who are suffering. Sometimes we're the ones lying by the pool. Sometimes we're the ones crawling on our hands and our knees, and we don't even have the strength to shout out. But I pray in that moment that we have the courage to at least extend a hand and to reach out. I pray that in the midst of so much that we can't control, that we will have the courage and the strength to focus on what we still can control. And I pray that in that moment we may experience the presence of God like never before, because we read about a God who didn't stay atop a mountain in a luxurious temple. No, we read about a God who came down from the mountain, strapped on his sandals, and went to where people needed God the most. And so if you are at a place in your life where you think you really need God right now, may I give you the assurance that that is typically where God is. And may I tell you, the sadness that you may be experiencing, or the confusion, or the pain, or the heartbreak, it is very real. But it's not the whole story. And to finish, I want to finish my story a little bit. And that was about 3 years after I became a youth pastor. I realized I hadn't taken a vacation yet. And I was like, where am I going to go? I was a single guy. I could go anywhere. Made a lot of money as a pastor. Just kidding. And I thought, I want to go to New York City. So I booked a week to go to New York. And I did most of the tourist stuff. I saw the Statue of Liberty in Times Square, Broadway play. But I knew the place I wanted to go to most was Ground Zero. And so I'm walking to downtown, and on the way I stop at a little pizza shop. And I just want to tell you, this little pizza shop, the only way I can describe it is that it was so New York. Whether or not you've been there, you probably know what that means. It was very tiny. There were a bunch of people in there yelling at each other, and it smelled like really good pizza. And so I got a couple slices, and they threw these greasy garlic knots on my plate. I didn't even ask for them. And I look, and there's no available table space. And I'm like, I guess I'm just going to sit with a stranger. And I sit down next to this middle-aged guy, and I start eating. And he says, how do you like the knots? And I said, honestly, they're way too greasy. He goes, okay, I'll tell the guys. I was like, oh, you know them? He's like, yeah, this is my place. I own it. I was like, I mean, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. And then I asked him, I said, so I'm trying to go to Ground Zero. How do I get there from here? And he's like, it's 3 blocks that way, and then da-da-da-da-da. He starts telling me. And I said, were you here on 9/11? And he goes, you see my floor? You see the floor? And I look, and in the tile, there's these big cracks on the floor. I didn't notice when I walked in. And he says, that happened on the impact of the first plane. And I still haven't changed that floor. And when that happened, every shop closed down all around this block. And we were down there every day trying to rescue people. We were trying to clean up the debris, help the first responders. We didn't care how much money we were losing at our businesses. We all were down there together. And then he pointed to his arm, and he had a bandage on his arm. I said, what's that? He says, I just got my 9/11 shot. I said, what's a 9/11 shot? He said, you don't know this? I said, I'm from California. He's like, that explains it. He said, everybody who was down there helping out has to get a shot every year now because some of the stuff that we inhaled and went through. We all get these every year now. I said, wow. You guys all went through this together. Yes, we did. From there, I went to Ground Zero, and I'm not sure if you've been there before, but that is the site of one of the worst tragedies in our history. And yet, it's so beautiful as well. these footprints of where the towers were are now surrounded by the name of every victim. And these pools of water going into those footprints. And on those names, when it's somebody's birthday, they'll stick a flower in their name. And I had a tour from a first responder that day who talked about the loved ones that he lost that were in his firefighting troop, but he would wipe water on their, oh, I knew him. Oh, I knew her. He'd wipe water on it. And there's such a spirit of reverence there. I don't know, church. After that experience, it was like I was given the rest of the story. That as sad and as heartbreaking as that moment was, that wasn't the entire story, because out of that came a group of people who responded by joining together, by being there for each other, by helping out and doing anything they could, and then using that space to become a memorial to their loved ones that they lost. It was beautiful. And to me, that's the gospel. And so I don't know what you may be going through right now, but I'm so sorry that you are. But I just want to say that if you are suffering, if you are in pain, if you are alone, if you are anxious, the gospel is for you. If you are healing, if you are thriving, if you are rejoicing, if you are celebrating, the gospel is for you to share. Following Jesus for me has been a beautiful journey that lets me know that I'm never alone, that lets me know that there's more to the story, that lets me know that it's my job to go and share hope and healing with my neighbor, and lets me know that when I experience the sadness that this world all too often gives us, there's a good chance that's when Jesus is closest. God bless you.